I was 10 and my sister was 6, she had open heart surgery to fix a congenital heart defect, her atrium. And she's not sure whether it was the left atrium or right atrium, which I find interesting. You would think if you had open heart surgery, you would know where the surgery was, you know, particularly when you're in the hospital for 22 months. She was hospitalized for so long, the surgery was successful, but in 1959, this was brand new stuff, and they had the machines to recirculate the blood and oxygenate it, and it was called the heart-lung machine. But what had not been perfected were the dissolving sutures to close all of the surgical tissues that had been, been cut open. And they were using what they thought was going to work, but it didn't. And so she had pieces of sutures floating through her tissues, causing infections. And it was so severe, she had to be kept in confinement. And I don't know what life is like in a hospital these days, but in 1959, a kid, me, being 10 years old, could not go into a patient's room. I was considered contagious. Why my parents weren't considered contagious was never explained to me, but I was parked. I went to my sister's hospital my parents went every day, and I went every other day. And the days that I went, they would park me in a little fountain area, like a little coffee shop area that had 3 or 4 stools. Back in the days, remember when drugstores used to have a soda fountain counter kind of thing? And that's what this was. And I would get a vanilla ice cream soda, which was a supreme treat, because my mother did not believe in sweets or ice cream. I never knew what Coke or 7-Up tasted like until I went to college. So there's stories about my mother coming, all right, but we'll get there, all right? First things first. And so that first year, the operation took place the day before Halloween. And I remember it as why it was Halloween, because my mother asked me to collect extra candy for my sister since she was in the hospital. And I thought that was outrageous that I would ask people for more candy and then I would have to share what I got. It just seemed like extortion or something. At any rate, coming into Christmas, so in the middle of December, the question is, could Barbsie come home for Christmas? Or was she going to stay in the hospital like forever, or just what? And I remember this one night, we're driving home and I'm sitting in the back seat and my mother turns around and she looks at me like it's business. We're having a business meeting in the car driving home. And she says, I have some good news. Dr. Maddox says Barbsie can come home for Christmas. But she'll come home Christmas Eve. She'll be with us for Christmas Day, and the day after Christmas, I'll have to take her back to the hospital. But no rough stuff now, remember that, no rough stuff. I said, oh, okay, right. And I said, gee, Barbsie coming home for Christmas, that could be like the best Christmas present ever. And it just spilled out. My mother looked at me like, she said, your sister coming home for Christmas would be the greatest Christmas present? Wow, you must really love your sister. I went, well, yeah, all right, yeah. And I don't know where those words came from, all right? We could speculate, the higher self, or my spirit guides, or the soul, but because half of this group is very woo-woo, right? And the book is clearly woo-woo. At any rate, I said it, okay, and it came out, and I stand by it. And 22 months later, all the infections cleared up, and Barbsie came home for good. So that's the first half of the story. 50 years later, Mom and Dad have died, and my sister has been declared the trustee of the estate that they left, which was close to $3 million. The house that they bought for 40 grand when I was 13 years old, we sold for $1 million. Yeah, cash. Where they got the cash, I don't know. I'm not sure I even want to know. So my sister was in charge, and my mother wrote me 3 letters explaining. She never gave me the letters, and she never told me about the letters. But the letters were a 3-page explanation of why she wrote in her will the following words: under no circumstances whatsoever is Bruce to receive any direct payments. Really, Mom? Wow. However, on another page in the will, my sister was tasked with using 1/3 of the assets, which would be dedicated to my welfare. My sister was going to be in charge of ensuring and maintaining my welfare, specifically medical, transportation issues, and housing. But nothing specific other than that. And my sister became paralyzed by issues and emotions and attitudes that we have only just begun to even think about, let alone talk about. But she wasn't able to do anything for me. And it got to the point where I'm living with Paul, and I move out of his place because I can only stay there for so many weeks. I'm in a motel in Edenville because I used to be living with Dave, but the 2 years that I was in New York taking care of Mom, and then she died, and we buried her, and then I had to clean out the house and then sell it for $1 million. By the time I came back to Edenville, the water damage and the mice and the rats, the trailer that I was renting from Dave, it was uninhabited. We spent a couple of days trying to repair it, and we said, oh, forget about it, threw in the towel. And it got to the point where I called my sister and I said, look, Barbsie, I'm broke. I need a place to live. I don't have many options. What do you suggest? She said, well, I think you should apply for government housing. I said, you gotta be kidding me. You're sitting on a $3 million estate. I'm supposed to get 1/3 of that, rounded off to the nearest million. And you want me to apply for government housing? Really? No way. I said, even if I put in an application today, I wouldn't see anything for 2 or 3 years. What am I supposed to do in the meantime? She said, I don't know, pray. And I said, yeah, okay. I wrote her an email, right? I hung up the phone, I wrote her an email and said, I'm terminating our relationship. I'm no longer your brother, you're no longer my sister, I'm no longer part of the Smith family. She texted me a couple hours later, said, please forgive me. And I said, I texted her back, I said, you're forgiven, and so am I. Because I know what I'm doing. I'm blowing up the family, okay? But this is how I feel, and I feel I need to do this. And that existed for 3 months. That stasis, that tension existed for 3 months. But I had a lot of conversations with half the guys, a lot of folks in this room I've had conversations with. And part of this process where I began to really transform my own life, my own perspective on how to live life. And I was growing, and I became much more focused and much more confident to live from the heart, to live from a heart-centered point of view, to come from a place of love before the head gets into it, before the head starts thinking about what's right and what's wrong and what you should do and what I need and what I don't want and who's nice to me and who, all of that kind of argumentative kind of thinking, and just come from feeling, come from intuition, come from connection. And I was doing this in everything I was doing in life, and I would focus on this. I'm coming from my heart. I'm resolving this family drama with love. And 3 months later, I wrote an email to my sister. I said, I rescind my statements of canceling, of not being your brother anymore. You're now my sister again. I'm now your brother again. And I have no expectations. Keep the money, give me the money, whatever, okay? I'm moving into this affordable senior housing. Social Security's paying for it. I'm getting food stamps, so I'm not going to die. You know, half the people in the boardwalk apartments are on food stamps too, and if not, Max certainly will tell you where the food bank is. You know. And then I got a phone call from my ex, Barbara, who I'd lived with for 14 years, who I left in 1990 to come here to go to the Ramtha School. And when I left, Barbara absolutely freaked out. I did not know that a human being could make those kinds of sounds. The screaming, the yelling, the shouting, the crying, the anger, all of it was, I'd never even seen it on TV. But we had a rapprochement over the years. To the point where we're pretty good friends. We can laugh at each other's jokes. And she called me up, she says, hey, you know, my birthday's coming up. I said, yeah, you're gonna be 90. She said, yeah, I'm an old gal. And she said, but we're not having a party in April on my birthday. We're gonna have a big party, the 90th, here in New York, and everybody's getting together. Can you come in from Washington? I said, sure, I'll be there. Now, she also extended an invitation to my sister. And so I see Barbsie at BJ's 20th birthday party in New York. And since we both are pretty much strangers, I know pretty much everybody in BJ's family, and my sister knows pretty much everybody, but we're kind of like, we're really, even though my sister and I have been at each other's throats recently, we're really closer to each other than we are to anybody else at the party, and there's hundreds of people. So we're sitting next to each other. She has her brother, her husband, my brother-in-law, and we're talking, and we're eating, we're dancing, we're singing some of the songs, and BJ is a dance movement therapist, which is how I met her, in psychiatry at the Nassau County Medical Center. And we did a lot of good old-fashioned country dancing, Jewish style, Israeli dancing and stuff like that. So my sister's up there, we're doing the horror, and my brother-in-law is, you know, hey, oh! Yeah. And we at the end, we were over dessert, over some cheesecake or something. I said, you know, sis, we really need to sit down and talk about the inheritance, you know? She said, yeah, okay, all right, you know, because I got some thoughts on that. And so we agreed the next day to go to my mother's favorite restaurant at the beach. It was a beautiful day. And started a little testy. My brother-in-law raised his voice, all right, and I just realized, when I heard him start getting angry, I said, there's no anger. I said, whatever we say, whatever we talk about, no anger, no trauma, no fighting, no argumentation. We're just going to come to terms with what is. And my sister said, you know, my heart's not the greatest. And I've got AFib. AFib, okay, here we go. She had been hospitalized in the spring during that 3-month period. And she's on medication, and it's working, it's not working. It's too much, not enough. And she says, I don't want to be the trustee anymore. She said, if you want to dissolve the trust, I'm okay with that. If you pay for it. If you pay for all the attorneys, if you pay for all the CPAs and the accounting and all the legal stuff, and get it squared away with IRS. And all I have to do is just sign my name on the bottom of the paper. It took us 7 months. I agreed. In 7 months, finally, I got my inheritance, beginning of January this year. And that's what's paying for the party. I gotta tell you. So, I got a text from her last week saying, I got good news and bad news. Good news is your tax refund from New York State on the inheritance has come in. It's a $3,000 check but the state deposited it into Mom's trust. And she said, I can't withdraw a check from the trust that has your name on it. So you have to call the Vanguard fiduciary agency, organization that's holds, it's a financial institution that holds the money. You have to call them and tell them that you're giving me the authority to send your money to you. I said, okay. I call them up, and then it started this incredible institutional nightmare of, well, I can't do that for you, Mr. Smith. I'll have to send you to the investment team. Hang on, can you wait a few minutes on hold, please? And so I get and it just went from person to person to person to different departments. And then we had to get my sister on the line, so and then so we're having a three-way phone conversation with the Vanguard fiduciary in New York. And finally, after an hour of talking to various people, my sister has been authorized and has promised me she's going to send me a check for $3,139. As soon as we found out, even though it comes from the state of New York and got deposited last week, and it hasn't cleared Vanguard. So it's not on their books fully, so we have to wait for them to clear their books. It's like, oh my God, what more could go wrong? So Vanguard hangs up and my sister and I are on the line. And we just start talking like two people. We talked for about 45 minutes. And so this is getting to be a long conversation because we've been on the phone with the Vanguard people for at least an hour. And now we're schmoozing for 45 minutes. And it was so sweet and so warm. Neither one of us wanted to hang up. Nice. And that's my story.